Bam.
This is Joshua Philipp, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
So we met before. We were just talking off mic about this. We met at the very beginning, March of 2020, and the world was beginning to shut down, but we didn't quite know what was going to happen yet. Like it was, this is how long ago it was. The Democrats are like, "You're
We
a
met up in
bigot," to
Manhattan.
Donald
That's
Trump.
right. It was Manhattan. Yep.
Yeah, and so we didn't know to make a big deal or too big or too small. It was a crazy time. So that was the last time
Well,
we met
people
face
were
to face.
terrified. I remember I was in the subway one time, and some guy like coughed, and the entire subway freaked out. And the guy's like, "I
Yeah,
ain't got
right.
COVID," you know.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. You had like a cough or a sneeze, you're like trying to swallow it. Like, I don't want
Yeah,
to
I
scare
remember.
you. Like it's just a little indigestion or something.
Yeah, God forbid
Yeah.
you like choke on a drink or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had, and my girlfriend and I we didn't get COVID until like uh, late 2024. We finally caught it for the first time.
Jeez. Yeah.
And, but in that New York trip, we went to a conference. We were on a train. We were on a plane. We were on subway, bus. We did all of it. And, it was just it was a weird time, man.
Tell me about it.
I want to ask, so if you recall, I used to be a spy, and so I develop sources. I talk to people; they tell me incredible things. I sometimes can't believe them, and then you dig deeper, and you find somebody else, and all of a sudden you realize that incredible thing I heard 2 weeks ago is true. You have a similar job, and you must hear the most impossible things, but you had to have taught yourself to like, I have to accept things so that I can test things, so that I can report things. How am I doing so far? Does that match up?
It's totally accurate. It's actually one of the harder part. It's one of the harder parts of the job. They say that reality is stranger than fiction,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's no lie. Sometimes I've been an investigative journalist since 2008. So I've been on this for a long time. Sometimes when you find the truth of what's really going on with something, it is more wild than any theory you could have ever come up with.
right.
And I've had that happen to me several times. Sometimes I can't even report it because I'm like, I don't think people are ever going to believe this. Like, there's no way I
Yeah.
can convince people of this.
Yeah.
And it's totally accurate. Yeah.
When you say that, I mean, I'm feeling what you're saying because life and death is on the line in both cases. Maybe a little more extreme with me because I'm in a very, very dangerous place, but I have to be accurate, and so I've got to decide at what point, Earl, Mike, because I don't get to know perfectly. I have to know good enough so I can say this appears to be a thing, but there's that hedge appears, right? And so, where's your hedge at? When do you get to say this seems to be good enough for me to go with?
So my approach is I regard everything as a possibility, or I don't disregard or accept anything at face value. I'm the kind of
Okay.
guy who I can listen to something and not accept it or reject it. And so, I just kind of compartmentalize it. And that's kind of how I handle like all information for the most part. Over the course of maybe like doing investigations and looking into things, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember someone told me about this. Then it starts to make sense. You got to be careful though, because I know some people do that intentionally. Like they try to
Hmm.
poison the well of your analysis. I've encountered that quite a lot also because they're trying to not necessarily feed you false information, but they're trying to feed you a narrative, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one thing you have to be really careful of. But yeah, I think my approach is I kind of just compartmentalize everything for the most part.
The you get the piece of information that seems unreal. The Chinese have police stations in New York City, and yeah, that's no way that's true. However, I know better, so I'm going to go look into this. How do you find that next source that is completely unrelated to that first source?
Yeah, so I was actually, I mean, I don't want to say I was the first journalist in America to uncover that, but as far as I know, I was the first.
Yeah.
So I actually began investigating Chinese spy operations in the U.S. in 2008, like accidentally. It was some big, it was ahead of the Beijing Olympics 2008. That's when my career as an investigative journalist started. And, effectively, there were these large scale protests, Chinese individuals coming out, and they were like beating up and threatening to kill other members of the Chinese community. And everyone was telling me, "Oh, all those guys attacking us are spies. You got to be careful of spies. They're everywhere."
Yeah.
And I'm like
Yeah.
looking around and I'm like, there were guys who did not look like James Bond, right? I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you that much. And over the course of time, I was like, okay, maybe, maybe not. And I started recognizing patterns, which was I started seeing a lot of the counter protesters had banners or the names of organizations written on like bullhorns or shirts or whatever else. And it was names like the Fujian American Association, the Shandong Association, the Peking Association. I mean, they weren't on that one particularly. And then I started looking into it. I'm like, well, what are these organizations? I ended up finding old records tying some of these organizations to the Chinese mafia.
Mm.
The Fujian American Association, for example, is one of the groups that kind of hosts the Fuq Qing gang. It's one of the largest transnational crime groups in the U.S. Human traffickers, drug traffickers, that all that stuff. And then I started realizing that, oh, actually, when you go to their website, they're very closely tied to the CCP. Like they're hosting all these Chinese officials all the time. They're doing all these events. Eventually, I started interviewing various sources, people stepping forward as they started seeing my reporting,
Mhm.
interviewing various sources. I did have some Chinese spies, people I believe were Chinese spies, try to get to me.
Sure.
I think I developed a healthy caution that prevented that. Um, but they did threaten to kill me several times. I was surrounded one time in Flushing, Queens, which is kind of like the new Chinatown in Queens. Surrounded me, threatened to kill me. I had a lot of that stuff. I had one time, one of my sources told me that he woke up, his tires were slashed on his car. One guy came up to him, told him they hired a hitman to chop off one of his hands. And I just did an article on it. I was like, well, if they do it, everyone's going to know it was them now. So we'll call their bluff, basically.
Yeah.
But I had some wild stuff. People coming in, very scared. I remember one source was like, "Okay, meet me on the corner of this street. A car is going to drive up. It's going to flash its lights 3 times. Hop in the back. We'll drive somewhere safe, and I'll tell you everything." I did it, and that was a crazy story. Another one was an undercover police officer who I met at a credible location. I can never say his name, but
Right.
took me on a tour through Chinatown and basically gave me the rundown on how Chinese espionage works, how Chinese organized crime works, and he was one of my best sources actually for a long time. And
Yeah.
I could never quote him on the record, but he gave me
Right.
incredible information. And then eventually, I started getting former Chinese spies, former pretty active dissidents, and so on. And what I uncovered was what was called the United Front Work Department, basically the long arm of the CCP. You can finally see articles on it. At the time, like some of the original government reports actually cited my work, and I
Mm.
was kind of concerned about that because I was still in college at the time, and the idea
Yeah.
that you're like the only source they have is kind of concerning. But on the Chinese police stations, basically they operate out of the United Front network, which is what I was uncovering. The police stations run through the MPS, the Ministry of Public Security, not to be confused with the MSS, which is the Ministry of State Security, which it does like Operation Fox Hunt, where they were chasing down people, threatening to kill them, or trying to make them commit suicide and stuff like that.
When
Anyways,
you
I've been on this boat
oh,
almost 20 years now.
yeah, man, it's crazy. And so just a couple things for everybody watching. Joshua's from the Epoch Times. There's something to talk about there. He has a show called Crossroads. I'll put the link up here in the comments. You see it down below. Look at my face right there, right down there. So make sure you guys go check this stuff out. And this is Pete, the spy, saying what Joshua does is credible. That's why I start with the spy context, because this is what we do in this world, and we get to meet people. And then I'm positive, Josh. Like he's gonna be like, and then I met this guy, and I can't believe I'm in this room because this is what happens in our world. And you understand that if there's a Joshua, there is a counter Joshua who's out there doing the same thing, but in a different direction. Or like someone hires a adversarial Pete who wants to go and do things like infiltrate DC or infiltrate New York City. And then once you have that network built in, a couple things happen. And I'm going to let Joshua talk here in a second, but this is the kind of work he does. And I want you guys to understand, like, people will dismiss something. I've never heard of Joshua Philipp. Well, guess what? He's been doing this for 20 years, and here he is in plain sight doing it. When you build a network, adversarial network to the US, to New York City, to DC, wherever it is, the people who want influence will come to you and they will say, hey, adversarial Pete, you have sources in DC. And I'm like, I've had a lot of sources. They've graduated up. They're in higher and higher places because I'm managing this network. That makes that person incredibly powerful, even though they're in this gray black kind of world. Man, oh man, if you want to get something done, he knows the cab drivers, he knows the shopkeepers, he knows the people who influence people. And that's what Joshua's detecting, these things and saying, oh my gosh, there's this whole entire source here. And there's always people that you can exploit to your advantage, good or bad, to find out more about these things. How am I doing? Am I how close am I to what you do day to day on that?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. It's funny. But people want to dismiss it, right? Like I'll say, oh, I have a source. Like I know people that know Donald Trump. Of course I do, and I'm not trying to run any program, but I just, because of what I do, I know people. And they'll say things about him to me, and they say good things, they say bad things, like anybody else. But if I was to say I have a source, I know someone who has worked with Donald Trump, and they said the following, no, okay, good. I'm sorry, I spent all this time meeting all these people, and you're just going to wave it off with one hand. um what is that our problem, is that we can't believe anything, or that we believe the wrong things? Where do you think, why do we struggle so much with narratives and what's being sold to us versus what's actually happening?
I think the big problem is a lot of journalists these days aren't really interested in telling you the truth. I mean, and I think people kind of woke up to that. A
Okay.
lot of journalists, they're going to skew things because they're afraid to say it. They're going. A lot of them are late. Like just being blunt, a lot of them are lazy. They're desktop journalists. They're not really interested in going out or getting boots on the ground or trying to meet people. AI is making it even worse now. You have some who it's not even them, it's like the networks they work for, and corporate or whatever tells them they can't cover this and they can't cover that. And if they cover it, maybe their editor will alter it or throw something out. I think the journalism industry is a mess these days, and
It
I
is.
think because people have started seeing through it, a lot of people are just they don't know who to trust anymore.
Yeah.
I can say it's actually why I mean I've worked at Epoch Times since 2006, investigative journalism since 2008, but I worked there since 2006. The reason I like it is because they don't tell me what I can and can't say. You know, basically my standard is if you can prove it, you can report it, but just be fair as you do it, and that's basically the extent of it. And I
Yeah.
kind of get free reign. Like if I want to pursue an investigation, I can run with it. I'm the kind of guy where one of the reasons why media tends to not invest in investigative journalism is it takes a long time, and sometimes stories end up nowhere. And so I will tend to have 15 or 20 running like simultaneously, and I kind of do it like that. But I've done a lot more than even just the Chinese stuff. For example, I was investigating
Right.
the border crisis. I actually went down to Panama to the Darien Gap, got access to some of the camps. It was very hard getting into those. I actually documented all the United Nations operations there, how they're running the whole show. Um, spoiler alert: what's behind the mass migration policy was actually an agreement the U.S. was signed on with the United Nations. It's called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. It was run mainly through liaison work between the State Department and the United Nations, including out in New York. But I went to Mexico, I went to Panama, I went across the U.S. Mexico border, interviewed sheriffs, government officials, illegals, a lot of illegals.
Sure.
I got some some surreptitiously recorded interviews with some United Nations people, the NGO networks. That was a huge investigation I did also. In fact, I did a documentary on that one. It's called Weapons of Mass Migration on Epic Times.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
but but just as an example of what this work sometimes looks like. Same thing with the COVID investigations. Early days of COVID, I tracked the origin of it back to China. I think I mean I got about 150 million views on that documentary. The thing kind of caused an international diplomatic crisis because we
Right.
talked about the cover up and got me attacked like you wouldn't believe. But everything I reported has since held up. But my point is with this, a lot of journalists don't want to do the work, and a lot of the journalists who can do the work are not interested in doing it because they're not trying to tell you the truth. They're trying to push narratives, and the problem they have is people are kind of seeing it now, and
Yeah.
I think that's why you see a lot of media dying.
Yeah. Well, when you, in both of our fields, your integrity is everything. If I bring you something outlandish, I'm bringing it because I've been proving myself up. I've showed you that I have good sources. And look, I might make a mistake, so for sure, double check my work, but understand I've already done my best to double check my work. But the more you compromise that to accomplish some kind of political goal or selling a Cadillac ad or whatever it is, the less credible you become, and it's really tough to get that stuff back. Really, really tough.
Well, and
I
and it's easy to get
yeah.
compromised, including by good sources.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah,
it's a challenge. You have to kinda keep everyone at arm's length, to be a good investigator. You have to keep you have to be friends with everyone, but keep them at arm's length, because you start finding a lot of people, they start wanting to use you. You know, I've been offered
yeah,
money, I've been offered, like, all kinds of stuff that I've turned down. Like, if you're corruptible and you're doing
yeah,
high level investigations, you're gonna get corrupted real quick.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's or even pressure to do things out of friendship. It's and so you have to kind of keep everyone at arm's length. It's not a pleasant job at all. It's a very unpleasant job actually.
yeah. It's challenging. The other thing is, you just talked about a bunch of things you've gone out and done because that's what you do, but it's not cheap. It's not easy. It is hard. So, like, when President Biden tasked Vice President Harris to go down to the border and go look into things and she didn't go, I deployed myself. And so I just went down and I talked to the judge down in Del Rio, Texas, and who's in charge of that whole response. He loved it. He's like, listen, I'm a Democrat. Let me tell you what the problems are. And he started breaking the whole thing down. And I just all I had to do, I'm nobody. He doesn't know me, but I had to drive, I don't know, 1,500 miles to go get that story. And I love it. And I was able to talk to locals, and all of a sudden, I knew a lot about that whole thing and what really mattered to that judge. He's responsible for things. He's like, the thing I'm worried about is if some migrant is walking across someone's yard and my neighbor shoots them, and I'm like, oh, because of the gun and having to put them in jail. He's like, oh, they're not going to go to jail. I'm worried that it's going to harm their well-being mentally, that they have to be worried about this. And I was like, man,
That happened to a friend of mine actually. Yeah.
I'm sure, right? And so we don't ever talk about that the folks who bear the brunt of this policy that and also one of his complaints was, he's like, "Hey, I'm a Democrat, but fund the policy." Because I asked him, "How many interpreters do you?" Because for everybody watching, Del Rio is maybe 30,000 people. It's a tiny little town, and it's like it's on the surface of the moon. There's nothing near it. If not, you can drive 2 hours before you get to Alpine, and it's a long, hard drive, not easy. And so to maintain the interpreter is required to talk to not just people in Spanish, but whatever language shows up. That's $1 million to have those people standing by, on a kind of retainer system. And he's like, we don't have the, I wasn't hired to do that by my people. Right. And so all of these other problems, and we're just talking about the governor and the president and back and forth. But he's like, there's real people problems down here. I'm going to shut up and let you talk about it because you did more work than I did down there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that point, I know people have been in situations like that. I have one guy I know. I consider him a good friend, but actually he used to live on the U.S. Mexico border, like right on it, and he used to deal with human traffickers coming off across his property all the time. One
Sure.
time he had the guy come up, tell him, "Oh, you have to get rid of your dog because your dog barks at us." And he's like, "What do you mean I got to get rid of my dog? It's a human trafficker, right?" He wakes
Yeah.
up the next day, his dog's dead. Yeah, they killed his dog. Um, Really terrible incident. He actually almost went to prison for it, but he ended up getting off, because self defense. But he actually caught a group of four individuals gang raping a woman on his
Oh,
property. Held
right.
him at gunpoint. They ended up defending themselves. He got in a full on firefight with them. Managed, I mean, terrible story, but managed to kill all the guys who were raping the girl in an exchange gunfight.
Yeah.
Um, but ended up getting off on self defense. But I mean, saved the girl's life probably,
Yeah. Yeah.
people deal with some crazy stuff like that.
Right.
And what people don't talk about is the cartel influence. Even like I've been to Del Rio, also on investigations. I've talked to people in some of the more remote border areas. You know what you have is you have cartel agents on American soil, like on the US side. They'll
Right.
actually pull people over like a police stop. They have little computers and they'll ask the person, "Okay, well, what do you do for a living? Where do you live? What's your name? Will you work for us?" And what they mean is like if you're a doctor, if one of their guys gets injured, they're going to bring it to you. They're going to bring the guy to your house to take care of him. If you're a lawyer, they're gonna make you, like, work for them, and if you say no, they might kill you.
Yeah.
I actually had one source who was giving me stuff on this, and she ended up disappearing. And it's like some of this work is it's like no joke.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm working on possibly doing some investigations right now, and I'm like having to talk to some good sources to see if we can even do it safely. Um, I won't detail it, but looking
Yeah.
into some human rights abuse stuff, and it would require foreign travel, and I don't. My issue is you have to deal with local crime. Is it safe enough on the crime front?
Right.
We actually have to work with sources who can do like forward analysis to see if there's like people are going to like possibly kill us in the place we're going to. Like it's not easy work. It's really not easy work. But sometimes it's like if you don't do it, who's going to do it?
Yeah, man. And again, like all of the things you're saying, I can relate to them. We would say, is this area permissible or not? And by permissible, everybody, you better have armor on. Don't go out alone. Like you can go out, but it's still very dangerous because i if Joshua and I walked into Nogales, we could go in and out 100 times, no problem at all. The second we start asking questions, we get noticed. And all of a sudden, you might just get snatched up just because you're a curious person. I mean, it really doesn't take a lot. And I'm saying
Even even
Nogales
even
is fine.
government, actually, I've gotten
Oh,
I've gotten pressure from foreign
for
governments,
sure.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
I won't say which country, but I was actually doing some investigations into Chinese spy networks in one country, and I heard from other sources, like, the local government was, like, tapping my phone and, like, surveilling us, like, everywhere we were going, they were surveilling us because
Yeah.
they're like, "Who are these Americans?" Like, you know, looking into all this stuff, basically, you know?
Yeah. It's crazy. And you talked about getting into someone's car based on like a source meet, which is how I would call that. And that's hyper dangerous. In the movies, it's great. It's like the hawk flies on Friday. You're like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the eagle screams at night. And so you go on your meeting and everything's good. Like, no, no, no. You talk like not like that, but that's what you do a bona fides because like, are you being tailed? Do we need to worry about something? Are you under duress? All these things you're trying to get it out. That's why it's called a mad minute. And then you've got to decide, are they lying or not? And you're always thinking about on the spy side, who's running who? Is this my source or my their source? And I got to be so close to being their source that they believe that I am. But we do this dance where I have to be valuable enough to them. They have to trust me enough to keep them safe. But also, I'm not compromising them. They're not compromising me. And you don't know. You just are using all the tools that Joshua has developed, I've developed. It's not simple, everybody, to run a source.
Well,
It's easy to
I
say,
can I
hard to
can
do.
give you something interesting on that.
Yeah.
Um, I would actually say the most difficult part is not necessarily like credible, not credible. The most difficult part is like what I call like gray zone sources or like
Mhm.
partial sources. So for example, as a journalist who I cover China, but I cover a lot of what they do outside of China. Like I cover a lot of like the espionage and infiltration type stuff, right? I do have some very good sources in China, but with extreme caution and delicacy because, well, I don't explain
Yeah.
why. But I can tell you sometimes when I read reports in other media where it looks like they're being critical of Xi Jinping or critical of one thing, I know kind of where they're getting their information. And what a
Mm,
lot of people don't realize is there are factions. So in China, like there's different factions. Xi Jinping is part of one faction. You used to have a lot of others. And what I could see was that like a lot of other like New York Times, for example, based on my analysis, they used to get a lot of their information from people tied to what was called the Jiang faction. Former CCP leader Jiang Zemin, he had a whole faction that was trying to push back against Xi Jinping. So the articles might look like they're against Xi and they're like, doing this stuff, um, but they were actually just serving another branch of the CCP. Like,
mm,
it wasn't any better. They were just serving one faction's interest. I can say since then, especially since Xi Jinping actually basically destroyed the Jiang faction. Like, the whole quote unquote anti-corruption campaign was about that. A lot of the media that used to be like Jiang faction aligned are now just pure on like basically full on like Xi faction. And the other problem you have too is some countries like the CCP they'll run people in the middle, and their intent is to kind of drive you is to agree with you and then nudge you. You know what I mean?
mm.
And so, like, for example, I have one guy, former Chinese spy in New York who defected. I've come to trust him pretty well. Um, his job with the CCP was to get the people in the middle. So he was a
Mhm.
Tiananmen Square activist. He was a democracy activist. When the CCP did like reform and opening up, he kind of became, he kind of got hope in China again. But he got pulled into the whole thing, worked for the CCP, and his job, which he's now off of, but his job was to get people who are in the middle and nudge them closer to the CCP. So to get the democracy activists, to get the ones who think there's something wrong with China, but maybe are open minded that things are changing. His
Yeah.
job was to basically control those people. And so and
Mhm.
that's where it gets really complicated with this stuff. Sometimes you can get accurate information that's not the full picture, and you're getting partial information or accurate information, but with a bad narrative, with
Right.
the intent of skewing you in a way where you're unintentionally working for like one faction. And that's where like investigative journalism stuff, and I'm sure your work too, gets
Yeah.
like really complicated because you have to start
Yeah.
understanding like the really minute nuances of all the information you're getting, and it's really hard to filter through it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I was gonna ask, how do you keep track of all this stuff? Obviously, you're writing it and you're living it, so a lot of it's in you, but we make mistakes. But if you were to enter everything into a computer, you would never get anything done. And I don't know if you guys have an analyst. I had an analyst behind me, right, who maybe would like what I was doing and ask me for more so they could work on a project, but they also are inundated with too much work, not enough time. And so, yeah, how do you process all this? How do you put it all together? Or is it just all you, your wits, and your work?
It's basically just me. I've tried to work with
Yeah.
partners, but they none of them could really do it. Um, so I have a way of doing my work, which is
Okay.
I trace everything to the origin. I trace everything back as far as I can trace it, and then I basically read everything from
Mhm.
the origin moving forward. I'll read every government report, news clippings, historical documents, old books, historical writings, whistleblower reports, public documents, and I'll scour through like everything.
Right.
I've powered through like 70 books in a night because you start getting to the point where you have a lot of repetition, so you have to filter out the repetition. And what you do over time is you start seeing patterns of change. And then what you do
Mhm.
is you start saying, okay, there was a deviation in narrative here. Two factions emerged. One believes this, one believes that. Then you start seeing, infighting within a faction. Okay, this happened here. That caused the deviation, which led to this being formed. Um, and then over time, this sounds funny, but I call them like machines. I build machines in my mind,
Mhm.
and I have machines for countries, I have machines for individuals, I have machines for political issues. And what you do is once you build basically a structure of understanding how a person, what is the basis of a person's way of thinking? What's the basis of how they operate? What's the basis of their beliefs and what they do and what they want? And how does that interact with the other mechanisms around them, right?
Right.
What I do then is you can enter a scenario into that machine, and you
Mhm.
can understand generally how they react to it. And so I kind of, when I do like really big investigations, this is how I compartmentalize everything. I also do mind maps. I build really
Mhm.
complex mind maps of tiers and structures. This is one of the ways I documented a lot of the United Front networks, for example. I built just massive mind maps. You see reports coming out in the CSSAs, the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, basically student groups at American universities funded and operated by the Chinese consulates. Um, More than 10 years ago, I mapped most of those, including evidence of funding, evidence of CCP operations, weird anomalies. For example, one of the CSSAs was shut down at Columbia University shortly after a Chinese student beheaded another Chinese student, and we never got the full story on why that happened. And so that's kind of how I do it. I build very complex pictures and I form my own understandings.
Yeah.
And so I'm very good at not letting my own view of things be skewed so much by information I get. I tend to have very unique analysis because of that, and a lot of it's because I basically just pour through everything.
Mm. When I do things like that, I do very similar things. I do rely on analysts above me. They say, but they usually have other concerns because I I don't focus where they focus a lot, right? So I'm having to do a lot of my own work. It is great when I get a paper from somebody else saying, "Hey, this is what we think is going on in your area." That's wonderful, and it teaches me a lot and it opens my eyes. So it's helpful, but not commonly available. And so among the things that I do is I'll take a nap, I'll shut my brain down for a while, and then my brain will go, "Here, here's an answer." And then I have to mind map it, but I'll get on a whiteboard, and I'm ambidextrous and I can write with both hands. So I'll start drawing out and writing everything and putting it into some kind of graphic, almost like I make my own PowerPoint slide. And then when I can't see how to connect something or something doesn't fit, then that will draw my attention and I'll try to solve that with someone I know in that little region. But that graphic drawing, I learned this from a colonel that I worked with, a guy named Colonel Green. It helped him see things that you couldn't see otherwise. And it's sort of a free writing exercise. So I'm not too worried about what goes there. I step back and I look at it and I improve it. And I step back and I look back. That's why the whiteboard part helps because you erase part of it, move it, redraw it. And it might be like a bridge and then a chicken and all these different things. And all of a sudden it all kind of coalesces into a better idea of what's going on in my brain. But the other thing I'm doing too is I would call them mentors who are like, "Hey, I don't understand the Sunni Shia divide." And then I shut up. And then they explain it to me because they will take the reality of it's not sectarian, it's more political. It's not just political, it's historical. And so they start explaining these things. And they may say the same thing to me every time I talk to them. But each time I've learned enough to understand more of what they say so I can push them further so they understand I have a better understanding now. But that is again, that's just it's long, laborious work. And yeah, reading whatever it is, right? Also, I don't read too much in my world because we make a lot of mistakes and I don't want to put too many mistakes in my head. And so I don't do a whole lot of that. But if I find a source I appreciate, then I will read that source. And they're invaluable when you find someone who's great, someone who's done a really good analysis of an area or a people because that can open doors in ways that wouldn't be common for the text I would normally read because it's written from a very specific point of view for a very specific purpose and that doesn't allow me to work in that space in the way that is beneficial to the unit that I'm trying to help.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that on that point too, sources are better than anything. And also I can say that one thing you find when you use my method, you kind of trace something the origin and trace it forward. You find that even most books are skewed one way or the other.
Mm,
Like
mhm,
a lot of books, I mentioned those kind of gray area sources or like partial sources. Books are basically like that. You're getting a
right.
partial source or a gray area source. Usually, it's written from one perspective, and there might be 20 or 30 other perspectives. And
Yeah.
so that nuance is important to understand. Is even with books, which to your point too is actually why sources and sometimes disconnected sources can be like really useful.
Yeah. And the thing with books doesn't seem like it, but when you read enough of them, you start to realize that there is a common thread because that's how we consume books. If a book is written in a matrix form, it's hard to process. And so the person is putting down the best that they can in the words available and the page count available in the market. So all these things determine what they get the right. Academic papers too, same thing. If this, then this, so this, and they throw this one little dart throw, and anything around that dart throw that's relevant is wiped out because we're only focused on this one little instance here, and so you have to understand the whole cone of possibilities to understand where the truth is. When I read a book, and I understand like they've got this point of view, and like people divide into three groups very commonly. Status quo, I don't like it, I love it. Right? You can apply that model to Puerto Rico, any kind of place. French Canadians, same kind of thing. And so a lot of the books will fall into one of those categories. So then you have to find the book from the person whose status quo is good, and then kind of compare and contrast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the ways I compartmentalize things is I try to separate interpretation, opinion from
Okay.
hard fact, right? Hard
Okay.
evidence. So okay, so one of the most deceptive ways a person will lie to you is by telling you the truth and then giving you a false analysis based on the truth.
Mm.
So I know
Mhm.
like Chinese psychological warfare operations do this a lot, right? Or Soviet ones. The Soviets are very good at this. It's what I call 1 + 1 = 3, right? So this piece of evidence plus that piece of evidence equals this. So, but you can exaggerate it slightly or come to a slightly false conclusion. And there
Mm.
are different degrees to this. Some sources who are kind of crazy will tell you 1 + 1 = 5 or 1 + 1
Mhm.
= 10. They draw an exaggerated conclusion from available evidence. In other words, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas you get some more deceptive sources, or even people who are keen but may not know, maybe not doing it intentionally, who will say 1 + 1 = 4 or 1 + 1 = 3. They have a couple jumps in logic in order to come to the conclusion they're coming to, or a skewed conclusion because of their emotions or because of what they've been
Yeah.
exposed to. And so you have to kind of compartmentalize what can be proven, what cannot be proven. Is the conclusion being given to you accurate? I tend to not really look at people's conclusions as much. I tend to more look at what they're actually giving me, like tangibly, because I
Sure.
like to have my own conclusions. But that is one of the big things you need to watch out for, and it's a big problem you find too in, like, as you mentioned, books or white papers and stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah.
I tend to mostly reject conclusions, but I do look at the evidence.
Especially when the conclusions, you read enough of them, you're like, what happened to the person who laid out this wonderful case? And now your conclusion's over here because you're mad about politics or something. And I'm like, oh, just take me back to the earlier person and just stick to what you found, and that's it. Like I
Well, and
totally
and
get you
the
with the
the bigger
conclusion thing.
challenge of actual disinformation is when a white paper comes out and makes a conclusion, and the conclusion is used as a source of another investigation.
Yes.
And so you might have an unproven conclusion be treated as hard fact.
Yes.
And the
Yeah.
challenge is when you start having 20 or 30 or 40 of those pseudo conclusions being used to form meta narratives.
Right.
And that's where you get like entire skewed narratives. I'd say in the US, a lot of the mainstream media does that a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
do it a lot, and
Yeah.
it's why I think their analysis is so far from the truth. Oftentimes, it's because they're basing it a lot on like hundreds upon hundreds of partial realities, false conclusions, opinionated analysis, and so on. That's
Yeah.
forming or things that are taken as hard conclusions or sources, and then you get a lot of those. Then what you start getting is sources whose opinions have been tainted by false reporting, and
Yes.
then nothing they say is really accurate from that point on.
Yeah.
It's a really challenging thing to navigate, actually.
It really is. That exact scenario happens around the A's moving to Las Vegas. And you get these reporters in the Bay Area who are very slanted against billionaire, billionaire, billion. Oh, okay. I've detected a code, And so when you use the word billionaire or you use the word oligarch, these are words designed I call it an affect, AFFECT, affect. They want a negative response to this thing so that you read more about the bad billionaire or whatever it is. And so they'll say there's questions about financing, and the next guy comes along. It's like the questions about financing are confirmed. All they said is that they've confirmed that there's questions about financing, but the way they put, and then it gets, and it gets, and it gets, and all of a sudden it's this chorus. And this is where like the AI part comes in because there's this predominance of opinion, faulty or not, it becomes the fact. Like the All Star game is going to happen next year. There's not going to be any baseball because there's going to be a lot, whatever. And we just don't know. We just don't know the future. And so bringing this back to the stuff that you do right now, and I know and recently in Crossroads you talked about this, and it's a thing I'm interested in too. We're dealing with Iran right now, thank goodness, because they weren't behaving in a way that made sense to the rest of the world. And Now we're worried about sleeper cells. And yeah, we should be, right? And we have folks for that, and hopefully they're able to get in front of it. But um, just because there are sleeper cells doesn't mean that they're going to activate. Hey, everybody, listen. If you're in a sleeper cell, right, and then Khomeini is dead, the contract is over. Like, you may be mad, or you may be like, you know what I love? Wings and titties. I am not going to go do this action. I like it here in America. Like, so just because there's a sleeper cell and someone pushes a button, or the dead switch goes, doesn't mean that they're going to do anything. And they might hold out. Who knows? But this fury, this fear, is way outside of what the actual threat is.
Well, once you start getting, and that's an important point. So yeah, on this, there was some alleged encrypted communications that went out, and everyone's saying, "Oh, well, they've activated all the sleeper cells now." Um, I think first off, just for the audience, yeah, sleeper cells should not be confused with lone wolf terrorists. The
Right.
sleeper cell guys would not be the ones going out and throwing a bomb at a protest. They'd be the ones trying to convince the guy to throw a bomb at a protest.
Right.
Um, but when you're dealing with IRGC or Hezbollah networks or something like that, what you are going to be dealing with are assassinations. A lot of it will take the form of maybe a sleeper cell agent working with like an organized crime group to do targeted assassinations. There was a case like that in Queens, actually. There was an Iranian agent who was arrested for trying to hire an Eastern European mafia to
Mm,
carry out an assassination of an Iranian journalist. So it's that kind of stuff. It'll be
yeah.
sabotage, maybe poisoning the water supply or sabotaging the electric grid. During the Cold War, that's what the Soviet sleeper cells were alleged to have been assigned to do, and if they were ever activated.
Sure. Yeah.
It might be feeding false information to the media. People don't think of information as being a war fighting domain, but it is.
Yeah.
With China, for example, they have what's called the three warfares doctrine, which is it's a military program, and it's psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. Sometimes it's political warfare. China, for example, they used to have what's called the General Political Department. They changed the name since, but basically, it's the political warfare branch of the CCP. And most countries have something kind of like that, but it's ways of affecting political change within a country. And so you look at the mass protests on the streets and you start realizing, oh, Chinese funded NGOs are pulling the strings of these things. That would be considered what you call political warfare, for example. And so, when we talk about military operations, it's not always stuff meant to like kill people. Sometimes it's meant to create division. Sometimes it's meant to attack the supporting arms of something. Sometimes it's meant to attack policy. Sometimes it's meant to wipe out sources that would affect public opinion or to alter public opinion. Like all this is really a different domain of war, but ties not only into war fighting, but even into like a lot of the spy stuff
Yeah.
that is not often taken into account.
There's a lot of ways to fight, and we are desperate for it to be, mano a mano, your tanks, my tanks, but people aren't going to fight us like that. And so, whatever Iran has done, they have tried to think through how can we do things, and it doesn't take much. Everybody, like, you can just disrupt. So if I'm a sleeper cell and I've got people who are upset with America, and I'm like, I want you to take some diesel and pour it on a cardboard box, put a cake inside of it, leave it at the airport. It's just a box with a cake in it. That's not against the law. Yeah, it's got some diesel on it, whatever. But that will cause a disruption in that airport. They don't know why that box is there. We don't know who dropped it off. They don't know what's inside. And so it will cause a panic. Um, High speed rail between not LA and not Vegas. All you have to do is get one piece of that track to not operate properly, and you will cause chaos. And so these are the kind of things that are simple things that are achievable by a very small group of people, and you can disrupt a lot of you can attract a lot of attention towards things that aren't even important at all, but it becomes important to the person. If you had a team of young vandals go around and throw bicycle locks on Starbucks, buildings, so when they go through those doors, now they're locked from the outside, you will cause a ruckus. The news will cover that. They'll go crazy. What's going on? Spray paint anything you want on the window for any messaging, legitimate or not, and they're all of that is going to draw attention. I'm just making up these scenarios, but these are things that are small things that can cause a lot of chaos in a system. And that's how you fight in a way that doesn't have a tank involved. And you're talking spray paint, kids, bike locks, simple. And it's not designed to do anything other than freak people out and get people to pay attention. Meanwhile, there's some other thing. And I'll say one more thing and I'll shut up and let you talk, Joshua. So if China and Iran are partnered and they're having the levers pushed against them by the current administration, they have the ability to partner with us and fund each other and do other. They'll find ways to take advantage. They always have the ability to do, and they'll do the most outlandish things because that's where their playing field is. And so they're not going to take us on with ships and tanks. We know that. But they have a lot of other areas where they know we're soft and they'll poke those spots and get us to respond.
Well, and this is, that's a very important thing, because one of the mistakes the United States makes is we often look at warfare as, counting bodies, basically.
Right.
That in Vietnam, that's what we did. For example, during the Vietnam War, though, we lost it. We didn't lose it because we lost the firefights. We lost it because we lost the information war.
Right.
So if you talk to a former Vietnamese general, you know what they'll tell you? They'll say we lost the war of bullets, but we won the war of words. They believe they were fighting two wars. There was the war of bullets and the war of words.
Right.
Um, if you deal with Chinese military thinking or even political warfare thinking, they believe every strength has a weakness. It ties into one of like the kind of the cognitive philosophies of China based on the eight trigrams, like Bagua theory. Um, one of the ancient Chinese books, I believe it's called the Master of the Valley of Demons. I think it's a bad
Mm,
translation, or but it's one of their core books on understanding human psychology, and it basically says that every strength has a weakness. Every trait, they define every emotion, every trait as being within different elements, and each one having a yin and a yang, a positive and a negative. Um, so, for example, softness, gentleness overcomes strength. Water can destroy a stone. The strongest men in history were not brought down by strong men; they were brought down by pretty women. You know,
yeah.
um, for example, ancient Chinese military philosophy would teach, if you don't like a king, don't try to overthrow his kingdom. Send a pretty girl to keep him busy. You know,
Hmm.
keep him busy,
Yep.
so he won't do his duties. Um, it's that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's the same thing when we're talking now. So what is the weakness of America? We're very powerful militarily. I think undisputed powerful. Like, it's not that Iran is a weak country. They're a pretty dang strong country compared to most other countries, but not compared to the United States. The Chinese radar that failed, it was probably pretty decent. It probably could have detected, maybe most, fourth generation fighter jets, but the F-22, I don't think it could do anything to stop that from going and blowing it up. You
Right.
know, and once
Yeah.
it's gone, it's gone. Once it's gone, we control the skies. And when you control the skies, basically the whole ground war is shot, because there's nothing you can do to stop that.
Right.
Um, but we're very weak on the information front. We're very weak on the ideological front. And so what you have are a lot of foreign agents. I mentioned the United Front Work Department of China. That this is
Right.
basically this is their full scale domain, just psychological operations, and compromising people and blackmailing people and buying people off and that kind of stuff. They do what they call liaison work, where they'll target the influencers of a country, your politicians, your business leaders, your investors, your journalists, your college professors. They do different operations, inviting them to China, bribing them, blackmailing them, feeding them information, and this is their full time job. You have literally, I believe it was Jamestown Foundation did a report. I think it was just
Mm,
recently. They identified about 1,000 United Front Work departments operating in the United States, over 500 in Canada. Like
yeah.
this stuff is not minor. Based on my analysis, there's even more than that. Because I've been researching it longer than they have, frankly.
Yeah.
There's even more than that. And so in their eyes, what are we, right? We're a country who does not agree on anything. We're a country where Congress, basically every 4 years, we're thrown into political chaos. maybe every 3 years because of election seasons. Um, Public opinion, general public opinion, is a huge domain for us because that determines what the politicians agree on or don't agree on, or push or don't push. And so, what is the public opinion right now? Well, overwhelming lack of support for the current wars, lack of proper communication on the reasoning behind it. I don't think I agree with taking down Iran, frankly, but I don't think the Trump administration has done a good enough job on justifying why it's necessary. I personally believe that Iran is not about Iran. Iran is about the global picture of conflict right now and what could have happened. That includes Venezuela, that includes the cartels, that includes China, Russia, that includes Hezbollah, that includes narco terrorism. I view all of this as being interconnected in terms of a unified global threat that could have been very bad for us if we didn't do something about it. I venture to say we probably avoided World War III when Trump captured Maduro, and even more so now that he's basically disabling the Iranian intelligence, the Iranian network. But I would say the main threat of Iran to the United States is not military; it's actually through the IRGC and Hezbollah. It's that is our biggest threat, and
Yeah.
eliminating that also eliminates a lot of the hands pulling the strings of global terrorism, at least in a coordinated way that falls into the use of the Chinese Communist Party, which is kind of the big brother on all these operations. But I don't think that's being properly communicated. So what you have is large scale lack of support, protest groups on the streets. Um, you have a lot of the anti-Israel stuff, even among not even partisan. It's right wing and left wing, who are like, oh, we're just fighting another war for Israel, and what that means is, and like I'm not saying believe one way or the other, but I'm talking about political use of this. What that means is the midterm elections are coming up, and if you have broad lack of support because of these narratives and lack of understanding of kind of the broader reasoning for it, you're going to have people vote against it. And when people vote against it, it's going to be over, even if the war is not over within, maybe a year or 3 years. And a lot of America's adversaries know that. They know that if a politician comes into office who's not in your favor, basically sign deals with them, be nice to them, wait 4 years, or at worst maybe 7 years, and within those years, things are going to change. And you're going to have another guy who probably is very different, and they play that game with us. That's how
Yeah.
they view our system. They don't view anything as being static. Everything is temporary.
Yeah, and boy, you talked earlier about multi-domain fights, social, cultural, political, religion, legal. All of these areas are areas where the competition can happen, and it doesn't have to be tank on tank. You don't have to worry about moving diesel around the world. You just need to, oh, we'll just take you to court. We'll fund a court case against Donald Trump to slow them, whatever it is. And it's just not a Trump good bad thing. That's just this is how you defeat things. We have a problem here in California where everything everything everyone has a representative and they can go to court and they can fight for their right. And so we'll say something like, we all have decided to tear down this old dam that's no longer functioning, and then everybody starts talking about it and we start spending money, we start going to court. 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later, and the cost to do the thing goes up to 10 billion, 30, all of a sudden you're paying $30 billion to not destroy a dam that needed to be destroyed 25 years ago. And so this is just like a microcosm of kind of how all of this stuff functions. Boy, getting Lloyd's of London to back out of covering ships going through when we can't move things freely on ships, that is a pain point for the entire world, and it will get dealt with, to include sending missiles to people's homes that we don't even care about today. But if that stuff can't flow, we lose our. So all this stuff is all connected together, and when you start pushing things like the president has here, everybody else has a say in part of it too. And so this is all part of this whole story.
Yeah, very much agreed. It's why a lot of China analysts point to what we call or what has been called the unrestricted warfare doctrine. It wasn't officially adopted into like Chinese military strategy. It was written by two Chinese colonels, I believe, in the late '90s.
Mm,
And the reason it's taken so serious by China watchers is because if you break down all the tactics they lay out, you can see the CCP doing every one of them. And what it is as you mentioned, multi-domain warfare. What would have, during, former wars been called, total war, total
Right.
war. Um, or, they call it gray zone warfare these days, or short of war tactics.
Right.
But unrestricted warfare lays out about 72 uh, non-military, trans-military, and unconventional military tactics. Non-military being things like culture warfare, being things like information warfare. The CCP has media warfare. Media warfare is the control of outlets of information. Psychological warfare, which is the control of the conclusions, the narratives. Legal warfare, which you mentioned,
Yeah.
the use of international court systems. They'll even send students here to study constitutional law. They'll go back to China and they'll inform their military on how to use loopholes within our constitution, and things like that. Is a war domain, to do things here using their proxies or people they bought off, or NGOs they're financing in order to do what they want. And they can do that even through American citizens who are Chinese, dual citizens maybe, but who travel back to China often. Like, they say that what they do is they use the open system of the United States. The slogan they have for this is what they call "strangle you with your own systems."
Yeah.
Um, Trans-military would be things like drug warfare, the use of drugs to kill more Americans than we'd lose in a full-scale war, killing more Americans every year than we lost in the entire Vietnam War, when you think about
Right.
it. Things that basically gum up our legal system, things that destroy the homes, things that kill off the youth, which would be our fighting force. It's more effective to kill people with drugs than full-scale warfare, and you're killing a lot more of them.
Yeah.
So there's drug warfare. There's when you go to trans-military, it's things like cyber warfare, economic theft being done by Chinese military hackers. Why is the Chinese military involved with that? Well, it's because, for them, economic warfare, business warfare. The difference being economic warfare is things that affect GDP. Business warfare is things that affect individual companies. For them, that's a war fighting domain. The military is involved with it. And then you get into unconventional military. That's where you get into things like biological warfare. That's where you get into things like, more unconventional types, where maybe they're working through liaisons within, organized crime groups or something like that to do assassinations, or working with NGOs and funding chaos operations on American streets using proxies where you can't really trace it. That's where you get into unconventional warfare. The Chinese biolabs found in California and in Las Vegas. That's that kind of stuff where you get into the domain of, unconventional warfare, but military, but unconventional. And so, yeah, multi-domain warfare is a thing.
Yeah.
And actually, this is something we're not very well fitted to fight. I think America's only kind of now waking up to even some of this, actually. But the CCP
Yeah.
has been on it for a very long time, as have other adversaries.
Yeah, and this is one of my critiques of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of War is, yeah, I get it. You want to smash things with tanks and then be like, done, we're leaving. But that's just one aspect of this fight, and religion is a big part, a big part of it, and we almost completely ignore the impact of this. And the example I always use is on the Iraqi flag it says Allah Akbar. Like, it's pretty fucking important to them. And back when we were there, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, again, the name is in the title, and we tend to ignore that. Hey man, listen, I've had you for an hour and it's been awesome. I've loved talking to you and catching up on this stuff. Everybody should go check out Crossroads. I'll put the link up for that again here. What else do you want to cover before we wrap this up? And thank you very much for coming on. It's really been a delight. Come on as often as you want. I'm glad to support what you're doing.
I appreciate it. Well, just for the audience, I have Crossroads. I also have a news show. It's called the Josh Philipp Show, which is in-depth analysis and investigations, or like in-depth reporting and analysis. That's also on YouTube, the Josh Philipp Show. I also have a few documentaries you might want to check out. My investigations into the border crisis. That's on Epic TV, which is epochtv.com. And that's called Weapons of Mass Migration. I also did one on Charlie Kirk and how there's digging into the information system and how they framed him. That one's called
Mm.
it's called Truth Under Fire: The Framing of Charlie Kirk. So you want to check out my investigations. I've done quite a lot of them, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff here. Here's the link for the mass migration film,
Oh yeah.
and then
There
the
you go.
Joshua Phillips show. All of that available. You guys all know what to do. Subscribe to Joshua's stuff first. And if you still got some energy left, put the subscribe button under your finger and push it for me as well.
Oh, you
Anything
do good
to
stuff. You do great stuff here too, man.
Oh, thanks, man. I try. We both do a lot of this stuff. It's funny how you can pour your heart and soul into something and trying to get something right, and someone again just waves it up. No, it's like okay,
Yeah.
all right, whatever.
You're
But
always right.
the hard work comes through, and so anybody who's looking to try to do investigative journalism, you just had a whole hour long class on how to do this stuff. Pay attention to what Joshua was doing. Really, it's awesome. Anything before we wrap this up? Anything before we say goodbye?
Oh, all good. Thank you all for being here, and yeah, no, I hope this has been interesting to say the least. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it. That's all that matters. But that's what counts around here. All right, so I'll say bye to you in a second. Everybody else, we'll see you all later. I think we've got something else for you later on. Actually, I know we have something for you today around 4 o'clock. So bye bye, everybody.